Hi everybody, this presentation is going to be on receptive language and expressive language. What are they and what's the difference between them? And I'm going to show you how you can find them in the standards and how you can tell if a child might be having difficulty with these. I also want to say this is very basic information. So if you were to listen to two speech language pathologists talk about these issues, we would get much more in depth and much more technical. So this is just very basic. So if you want to know more about these two, feel free to let me know and I can give you some more specific details. So I'm going to get out of the screen because I do have some slides and my picture will cover up some of the information. So I'm going to get out of here. Okay. So the first thing I want to point out is language is not articulation. Those two things are not the same thing. Articulation is the way a person says the sounds in a word. So that is not language. So you might hear children make errors with their articulation. Instead of fish, they might say pish. Instead of little, they might say whittle. Instead of cookie, they might say tutti. Instead of round, they might say wound. Those are articulation issues, and that's not what this is about. So if you think you have, if I'm working with a child and you wonder, well, why? They sound fine. I understand everything they say. That's because I'm not working on articulation. I'm working on language. So this presentation is about language. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that you're going to see pictures of dogs in this video, and you might also hear some background noise at my house of dogs because I have 3 inside this morning. Okay, receptive language, that is understanding. So if you just want to boil it down and remember one thing, remember receptive language is understanding. It's understanding what is said to you. You understand the meaning. We also call it listening comprehension, auditory comprehension, and you're basically receiving the verbal message that is sent to you. So if your kids are at a grade level where they are listening to stories being told to them and answering questions, that's receptive language. That's not reading comprehension, that's listening comprehension because they're not reading it themselves, they're listening to you give the story to them. So receptive language is understanding what is said to you. Expressive language is using your own words, phrases, or sentences to give a meaningful message. In a nutshell, it's talking, and later on, it also includes writing. Now, it can get more complicated than that, but just for basics, when you're expressing yourself, you're talking, you're speaking, you're giving information to someone else that's meaningful. So which develops first? Receptive language develops first. You have to be able to understand information or a concept before you can meaningfully talk about it. So think about babies. Babies understand what you're saying to them much sooner than they can talk themselves. And this is the same as at school. Children are going to be able to understand things first and then talk about it. This is going to be important for the standards, so we'll talk about this in just a minute. But just remember, receptive language, understanding, comes first. So receptive language and expressive language are difficult to separate in the curriculum because we need for students to demonstrate their understanding. We need for them to show us that they understand the concepts, they understand the information, and they understand they understand the information you're giving them. So in order to do that, they have to create a product to show that they understand. So you can't just look at a child, teach them, and then look into their brain to make sure they understand it. The child's going to have to do something to show you that they understand. And that product, that showing, often requires expressive language. So when you're asking a child to complete a standard, or when you're measuring their ability to complete a standard, rarely are you only looking at their understanding or their receptive language. You're looking at both. Did they understand it? And can they create that product using expressive language to show you that they understood it? So if a student's not meeting a standard, is it because they have poor expressive language, meaning they don't know how to use their words meaningfully to show you what they understand? Or do they not understand it? If they don't understand it, that has to come first. So of course, they can't use expressive language to express what they don't understand. Or is it a combination of both? So here's an example. With prompting and support, retell familiar stories, including key details. That's one of the standards in kindergarten. So retell is an expressive task, which is designed to measure, in part, comprehension. So you've told the child a story, and you want them to retell it. Well, retell is expressive. It's something they're going to have to talk about or write about. And remember, they can't do that if they didn't comprehend it in the first place. But if a student can meet this standard, you can be fairly confident that they can do both. They understood the story and they can use expressive language effectively. But if a student cannot meet this standard, why? Did they not understand the story? Did they not remember the details? Do they not know how to sequence? Did they not understand the vocabulary? So this is where it becomes tricky trying to figure out, why did the child not meet the standard? Was it because they didn't understand in the first place? Or was it because they understood, but they just aren't able to express it? Or there could be other factors, like I've mentioned here, like memory, for example. So let's remember, understanding comes first. Demonstrating comes second. We can all relate to this. When you're learning something new, you can understand what the person is talking about and have the concepts in your mind before you can teach it to someone else, before you can talk about it meaningfully. So let's look at some of these words that are built into the standards. These are expressive language tasks that are in the standards, but they're being used to demonstrate comprehension. So when we ask a student to ask questions, answer questions, describe, compare, evaluate, discuss, explain, draw conclusions, summarize, report, communicate, we're asking them to use expressive language skills to demonstrate their comprehension. So it can be difficult to tease those two out. If they can't meet the standard, we're trying to figure out, well, why? What is the problem? And you may not, as the teacher, always be able to do this, but these are some tasks that remove the expressive language requirement. In other words, these tasks do not require a student to speak or to verbalize or write in order to show you that they understand. So if a student has difficulties with these particular types of tasks, the issue may be receptive, meaning they're not understanding. If they can do these types of tasks, but are not meeting the standards, the issue may be expressive language. So if you give a child multiple choice questions, they basically just have to identify or recognize the correct answer. They're not having to say anything or verbalize their own answers or generate their own answers. They just need to identify it, which would indicate they understand. Pointing to answers, this is something we do in speech and language probably more than you would, But this is one of the ways we try to tease out whether it's expressive or receptive. So again, if they're pointing to answers, they don't have to say anything. And then following directions that require just actions, not saying anything, but just following directions that require actions. And when you think about this, you want to also think about multiple step directions, if then directions. Before you do X, do Y directions. All of those involve language, but they don't require you to say anything. So these are some receptive language tasks that can kind of help tease out the difference. So in a nutshell, receptive language is understanding, and expressive language is talking or writing meaningfully. Receptive develops first for any new concept or idea. And the standards require expressive tasks to demonstrate the understanding. Okay, I hope that was helpful. And I hope you're all having a great day on this professional learning day. I'm going to stop the video now, and my dogs were nice. They didn't bark or create problems in the background, so that was great. Bye-bye.